You're listening to Bad Dog Agility, bringing you training tips, interviews, and news about the great sport of dog agility.
I'm Jennifer.
And I'm Sarah, and this is episode 208. Today's podcast is brought to you by Elite Science. Unlock your dog's full potential with a unique competitive edge solution, 1TDC. 1-tetradecanol complex is a patented blend of unique fatty acid oils designed to safely and effectively keep joints and muscles at their best to maximize performance and shorten recovery time. 1TDC is the next generation of fatty acids beyond glucosamine and fish oil and is used by many current and past national agility champions and world team members. All of our listeners will automatically qualify for a great 1TDC special offer by purchasing online at bda1tdc.com. That's BDA, the number 1, TDC.com. Today's podcast is also brought to you by hititboard.com. Hititboard.com has the innovative training tools you need for agility. Having problems with the dog walker A-frame? The Hit It board can fix that. Your dog doesn't like tugging? They'll love the Tug It. Can't move your A-frame around by yourself? The Move It can. Go to hititboard.com and use discount code BDA10 to get 10% off your order. That's hititboard.com. Today we have a special guest on the podcast. We have AKC judge Greg Fontaine, and he is here to talk to us about some experiments he's been running in course design. Welcome to the podcast, Greg.
Oh, thank you all for having me. I appreciate it.
So the question is, what were your goals with these experiments that you were running in kind of a different way of approaching course design?
I think as we've all been watching a bit of the trends and the trends come and go over the years, I think one of the trends we've seen lately is a greater appreciation for the effect that spacing between jumps can have. We've seen internationally a little bit more focus on not necessarily subjecting the dogs to a jump followed by another jump without sufficient space for even the most athletically gifted dogs with big, huge potential strides, being able to at least get 2 fully extended strides in, if not a little bit more. That becomes a little bit more difficult in the constraints that we have in our current settings in AKC or even in USDAA. In our organizations here, we're not as accustomed to worry about that. We've even developed and evolved some other trends that have maybe gone away from that. So the purpose of what I was trying to play with was how to maybe fold in some of that larger spacing between consecutive jumps, but still fit within the expectations that exhibitors might naturally have if they're an AKC exhibitor or other flavors, a USDA exhibitor as well.
So I called this an experiment. So I've been doing a lot of experiments recently because I've got kids and they're in school and they do science fair projects every year. So I know that you have to have a hypothesis and you have to have procedures and you have to have conclusions. So I would reframe your hypothesis as there is an ability to work within the rules that we have and create courses that are more friendly to our larger dogs and follow some of the trends that we're seeing internationally in agility.
Yes, that's a fair hypothesis. Sure.
All right. And so let's talk about procedures. How did you go about your experiments?
Sure. Tried a couple different ideas. The first idea, something that has also been seen overseas and is even seen here from time to time at either larger events or in tryouts, for example, of making a course that was at least somewhat different. So a jumpers course, for example, from Master Excellent Jumpers course, where the large dogs, the course was expanded somewhat, changed somewhat, tweaked a bit compared to the small dogs. So we might have started with a large dog course where, if you imagine the build out of the course took up a certain amount of space. For the small dogs, we brought everything kind of in toward the center a little bit. It involved a tweak. So we had like the dogs that were the 24s, the 20s, even like the preferred 16s. The dogs who naturally were measuring as the larger dogs would be running a course that was built a little bit more openly. And then during the walkthrough change, when we had the small dogs come, people were going to come out to walk with small dogs, we took a few extra minutes to bring the course in a little bit, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And as far as getting that, the process of, that experiment and getting that approved, AKC has, course design reps that approve all of our courses. I've found that anytime that you present something as a new idea, they'll at least listen to it. This wasn't the first time we talked about it, this past year, but it was a good opportunity to try it. And we found kind of a good show to give it a shot, right? You want to give an experiment a chance where it's a good setting for it. So we had a large show, so there were plenty of walkthroughs. We had flexibility about where we may or may not want to break the build and switch. We had a lot of experienced people there that were running the show. Kathy Leggett was involved with the group, so she has a lot of experience as well with international type courses, and also the idea that there might be a large dog course and a small dog course. So it wasn't completely foreign to her. So it became a good place to give it a shot.
Of the things that you're experimenting with and the things that we talk about in course design, I think the ability to have a small dog course and a large dog course is probably one of the things I'd push for the most, and I think is a great idea. Because having run both large and small dogs and looking at the international competition, I think we see a lot of large dogs who can excel on some of those courses that are a little bit more wide open. But then as soon as we crunch them down on a somewhat smaller course, they really struggle. So, you have that question of, do we have some untapped potential of dogs that maybe aren't getting qualified for tryouts or maybe aren't qualifying for these big events that if they were put on those courses really could excel? And then I think you have the opposite with the small dogs, dogs that maybe run a typical AKC course and are perfectly fine because the off course isn't as close as it might be. But then we show up to an international event and the small dog course is ultra tricky and we haven't been practicing or qualifying or training on those. So, I love that aspect and the ability to tweak the course and change the course, whether it's the distances or an angle on a walkthrough is a fabulous idea. So I'm glad to see you trying that out.
Well, thank you. And I think you made from my experience with the one attempt we did this past year with it, in California this past summer, I do think that we tried to open the course up for the large dogs. I think the thing that you hit on most, that was probably the most relevant thing compared to maybe some of the other ideas that we've been playing with, is that for the small dogs, bringing the entire course in, you did bring the off courses much more in play. It felt more like what you would see if you were at EO, where all of a sudden an off-course jump isn't 21 feet away, it's 15, 14 feet away. We didn't quite go all the way down to 14 feet maybe, but, bringing it in from 7 yards away down to a little less than 6 is a significant difference. It affects people's timing. It changes how, it changes how they react to a sequence. Puts them under more pressure. Different things happen, whether it be off courses, whether it be refusals or bars that are coming down because they're having to work the question more. So that I agree was one of the biggest differences I saw in watching the one round of it we tried.
Now, in the run that you tried, I'm just kind of curious. I know we got a long way to work on logistics. Where did you put the preferred 16s? Because they're 16 jumping, so they're kind of small, but generally they're considered large dogs. So where do you guys put them at?
And we spent a lot of time. So both Kathy and Mark, we took feedback. My rep, Mark Sjogren from AKC, Kathy Leggett was involved at least somewhat early on, just because she was secretarying the show. We needed to coordinate, if we're going to have these splits, where we're going to do the running order, how are we going to make sure everybody gets the walks they need. For that show, we did end up putting the 16-inch preferreds, who measure the same as a 20-inch jumping dog, in with the larger dogs. We figured, well, they're more naturally measuring as larger dogs. Let's leave them in the larger dog space.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me.
Yep, me too. We approve.
A lot of good minds on this. It is nice to have. No kidding. I mean, review process is sometimes a bit arduous, and sometimes you go through things where you want to do things a certain way and you have to work together. It does help sometimes to have a lot of experienced minds on stuff. I mean, that was a good answer, and it came through just talking it out amongst people who had been around and had thought at least some of this through before. So that was nice. It was helpful.
I think one of the things that I found most interesting about what you were doing is that you were doing it within AKC, with the blessing of AKC, working within the rules as they exist today. So I think it really speaks to the idea that there is still creativity available to a judge, and not just creativity in terms of your course design, but creativity in terms of how you tackle these problems of how different our courses tend to be from other organizations, and people have a tendency to think of it as a unsolvable problem, right? That the answer is that you train on your own, or that you switch organizations, or things like that. But I like that you looked at this to say, what more can I do in the space that I'm in?
And I think we all have our little place in this, in any of these questions where, okay, as a competitor, yep, you need to train and you need to adapt to what you see. You need to make sure that as best you can, you play to your dog's strengths and your strengths, and you build your skills. As an organization, if we can look within what's possible, and I'm not expecting necessarily to see, an immediate adoption of more small and large dog variations of a course anytime too soon. But I'm glad that the idea was at least accepted as a possibility, as something to look at. And they were open, AKC was open to letting me play with it. Mark was going to be there at the show to take in feedback, to watch it. I think that was part of why it all came together as an opportunity to try something like that.
And then how did the, AKC obviously needed to approve these designs, but the club was on the hook for implementing it, for doing the extra bit of tweaking and stuff. And you as the judge, right, you have to be willing to, to do that extra bit of work. So how did that all work with the club?
Well, I think, again, one of the nice things about this chance to do it and this chance to try this little experiment was you had people who've worked together a lot already. Mark Sjogren does a lot of work with the tryouts and invitationals in the past. He and Kathy have worked together a ton in the past before. So when it came to organizing, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to put together the walkthroughs to make sure the running order works for the club? And it works that we've got a split where we can put the 16-inch preferreds on one side of the walkthrough and the 16s on the other, because the 16s, the regular 16s are naturally small jumping dogs, right? They're smaller dogs. It was nice to have a group of people at the top of this who all knew each other, who had all worked together. So at least when you first tried the experiment after, maybe not having done it for a while, you can kind of see, well, what's the best we can make of it. And they were great to work with. And Mark, it just worked out. He was going to be there for supervising, another judge on site during the event. And it was just a good chance to put it together and give it a shot.
I think when I first heard about this, somebody tipped me off that you had this show where you did different courses for large and small. And I contacted you at that point, and you told me, well, let's hold off a little bit because I've got some other experiments that I'm going to run. Yeah. So what were some of the other things that you tried, kind of other ways of attacking this problem?
Well, again, like you mentioned, you want to work within what the organization's guidelines and what the expectations are, because people come to AKC to play AKC agility. That said, AKC agility can evolve and incorporate, maybe a way for there to be more spacing for larger strided dogs, but still keep a large bit of the feel of what a normal AKC course might feel like. The biggest difference then, the next experiment would have been to just try to design the courses so that they still met within AKC guidelines for, the distances that are between the obstacles. And those guidelines actually allow for as much as 25 feet between any two obstacles, with no other reason than you want to give them 25 feet. If you go beyond that, there need to be some specific reasons. Maybe it was a wrap turn. On the odd case in a premiere, maybe a push to the backside, or going through a large box with lots of choices. You can put in more space in those kind of sequences, but in general, you still are allowed up to 25 feet between obstacles. Some of the question then becomes, well, when you provide more space, you start bumping up against some of the upper limits in terms of the maximum yardages. Unlike overseas, where a maximum yardage might be now as much as 220 meters, which is 240 yards maybe. On a jumpers course, we might only have maybe 180 yards our maximum. So you've got to watch that, you're giving more space. Maybe I can't put them through 2 long tunnels, or maybe I have to make it an 18 obstacle course rather than a 20 to get my yardage into an acceptable range. I typically found that the next experiment was essentially to work straight within those guidelines, not have 2 different courses, one for the large, one with the small, but just a traditional setup of one course for one level, work the distances such that the course, when it flowed from the one number to the next number, the correct flow of the course, the spacing was at least 23 feet, maybe 24. On occasion, a wrap might be a little bit more, but then also bring the off courses in a little bit more. So that the off courses were probably, some of them were at 20 and 21 feet, but some were at, maybe 16 and 17 feet. So it's a little less of a drastic experiment, but it was an experiment within more of the even currently accepted existing kind of standards. How can we open up the flow of a course through the numbered sequences, at least, so that the largest, most athletic of the strided dogs could still get those 2 fully extended strides in through most of the sequences. The biggest challenge in AKC, I've mentioned one of them. You've got some yardage questions like the maximum course yardage. You also have the challenge that internationally they don't have. We have a course where we're only allowed to use the weave poles and 2 tunnel passes. Everything else is jump to jump. Internationally we can go jump, tunnel, backside, tunnel, jump, tunnel. We can intersperse 5-6 passes of tunnels, a set of weaves. We can throw a backside in. So the number of times you're going from one jump directly to the next jump, maybe it happens 2 or 3 times on a 20 obstacle, out of 19 spaces between obstacles, maybe it happens 3 or 4 times, 25% of the course at most. On an AKC course with only 2 tunnels and a set of weave poles, the least I can put dogs jump directly to another jump is like 2/3 of the time. If I go jump tunnel and I come out tunnel jump, and I go jump weaves jump, that's 6 interactions, like 6 spaces between obstacles. Well, I've still got at least 17, maybe 18, 19 others. The whole course has 19 spaces. So I've still got 2/3 of them left that are jump to jump. And I can't really go backside all that much or wrap all that much on a traditional AKC course. So that's kind of some of the puzzle that you run into. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think one of the things that I've found most interesting in, I guess, my agility education somewhat recently, I would say in the past 3 to 4 years, I started looking a little bit more at course design, not just course design, but all of the requirements that are put on judges, how much yardage you can run, what things you have to be able to see, what distances you have to be from certain key obstacles. And I think that the vast majority of competitors who have no interest in judging are really unaware of these kinds of constraints. And I think that it is worth people getting a little bit more knowledge about it. And that's why I think this is such a great topic, because it helps you understand the constraints that people are working underneath.
Sure.
And then to see where things can change and where things are set and aren't going to change or at least aren't going to change without a rule change, rather than just showing up at a trial and saying, I like this course, I don't like that course, and not really having any of that background.
And look, I'm the last one to be like a rule is great because it's a rule. I mean, people who know my background know I'm willing to play within a lot of different ideas. And, a rule today can be gone tomorrow, tweaked, changed, and we can adapt and kind of see where things go. And that's how the sport grows and changes and evolves and gets better. But, every rule that's there today, for the most part, came about out of a concern for something. I mean, the reason we have only 2 tunnel passes in AKC right now is a recognition from the AKC's part that large dogs find, excessive numbers of tunnel passes to not necessarily be a reinforcing experience. It affects their rate through the course. It physically is challenging for them, particularly if the tunnels have bends. So there's at least an idea there that, it's been supported from, a thought, which is let's make the courses good for large dogs by not having a lot of tunnel passes. Well, maybe we need to re-examine that and maybe there's a better answer. Maybe the answer is involved in what the nature of the tunnels are. Maybe if a straight tunnel isn't as difficult on the dog or a soft bend rather than a full bend. So I guess my biggest reaction to what you just said is when you have questions, when someone says, why can't we do this? go find somebody who can genuinely give you at least the thinking of, maybe that's not the best answer, but it's the best answer a lot of people have been able to kind of get to so far. And that doesn't mean it should always be that. I mean, again, I'm all for test stuff, play with it, tweak it. Let's change it. We should change things probably more. Change should be more easier adapted, more available than we probably let it be for all kinds of other reasons. The sport would grow faster, get better if we change more quickly. But there's a reason why things take a little time to change. So I don't know. That makes sense.
Absolutely.
So when we talk a little bit about logistics, the people that are listening and maybe haven't had a chance to look at the show notes are going to say, oh, well, if we have two different courses, a course for the big dogs, a course for the small dogs, we're going to have extra changes and it's going to be a course build and it's going to take more time and lengthen the day. But for those that are listening and haven't had a chance to look, I just wanted to note that the course that you did, that you modified for small and large, the big key obstacles didn't move. So the weave poles stayed where they were, the tunnels stayed where they were. And as a person who does a lot of course building, I think this is fantastic and should take some ease off people that, we're not rebagging tunnels, we're not unstaking the weave poles, that it is just some angles and some placement of jumps. The other thing is the numbering of the course didn't change. So we're not talking in a completely different course for smalls and larges like you might see at EO tryouts or AWC. The flow of the course is the same. So if I have a 20 and a 12, I'm walking the same course. The distances or the angles are different. And if I'm a course builder, I'm not unstaking the weave poles and I'm not undoing the tunnels. So, hopefully people will recognize that or go and look at the course map that you did. And I just, I kind of wanted to point that out that it's small changes that are making a big difference, not a complete rebuild, rewalk, and totally new course for people.
No, thank you. We really tried hard to do that, particularly given that, it's a big show. It's a long day. You do want people to not have to just wait around as we completely deconstruct. I think the tweaking of this course took, I was out there to do it because I was most familiar with what I was trying to do, but, it was like maybe a 5-minute tweak. It involved me because I had to wheel both courses twice. I can wheel while people are walking, but maybe there's another couple minutes there. So it probably added 7-8 minutes to the day.
And we do have one example of each of these strategies that you used that you shared with us, and we'll put on the show notes for this episode, so people can go and take a look at that. On the second course, for when people go and they look at it, can you is it possible to explain what we're seeing? When people go look at the image, they'll know what I'm talking about. There's lots of arcs in different colors and stuff like that.
You mean this lovely impressionist, modernist canvas here with all these lines and arcs? Yep. Okay, so looking at this jumpers course, what you first notice is there are all these, a rainbow of color of all these little triangles with, they almost look like, I don't know, they're cones, right? And they have arcs. Basically, they're denoting a area landing a jump. On the map, we look from number 1 to number 2. You'll see that as the course goes from 2 to 3, you follow the arrow, and there's a light purple cone that aims forward, and it essentially comes off the dog's anticipated path right as the dog is crossing 2 and shoots forward a cone. And that cone then has a minimum distance, which is the shorter arc, and then a maximum distance, which is the longer arc. And what we want to see in AKC is obstacles that are essentially in that strip between the shorter arc and the longer arc. Those what get calculated in AKC as a off-course option or choice that the dog might take. And that is the primary way that AKC looks at, is the course difficult enough? Does it have enough challenge? Are there enough opportunities within the dog's view as they take an obstacle to head off in the wrong direction and take the wrong obstacle rather than turn toward the correct one? And so in this course, there must be a good 10, 11, 12 of those on here, because this course actually does have, on a Master Excellent level, we expect to see maybe 9 off-course challenges as a minimum. this has at least a couple extra, I think, on there.
Excellent. Yeah. And so if we look at the line, the dog's path, we're going to see between 1 and 2, there's 23 feet, 2 to 3, there's 24 feet. Basically it looks like about, 23 or 24 feet between all of the obstacles that the dog takes. That's what you were pointing out earlier. If you take the right number, then it's, 23, 24 feet between. And then these cones are showing us all of the off-course traps. Okay. That makes sense.
Right. Yeah. If I can make one more observation on this that we were talking about earlier, talking about bringing some of the off courses in a little bit more. These lines on the arcs, these little triangles, the closer line is 15 feet out. The further line is 21. Often as you expand a course outward, like when we did the first experiment we were talking about where we just expanded the entire course, what tends to happen is that the off courses, just like the on courses, kind of all get pushed out or all get brought in. In this experiment, what we tried to do was have the on flow be, on average, probably 8 yards, 24 feet of space. But some of the off courses, the first two are pretty good, 21 feet out, right near that outer marker. But then take the corner heading from 5 to 6 to 7. You've got a tunnel that's getting in there more toward maybe 19 feet as an off course going from 5 to 6. That little wingless jump that's in the triangle there going from 6 to 7, that kind of purple-ish, magenta-ish kind of colored triangle. That wingless jump, the inside part of that jump is right at 15 feet. So you're starting to see some off courses as you go around and look at these cones on this course where the off courses now are getting off of that 21 outer marker and in closer to that 15-foot inner marker, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. No, I totally see what you're saying now. So hopefully that people that are listening to this podcast, just hit pause, take a minute, go pull up that course and listen to this section and it will all make sense. But it's very interesting what you pointed out about how when you expand the course, you gave the dogs more space, but it made it in a lot of ways less difficult. And that also isn't kind of the direction that you're really looking for if we're trying to appropriately challenge our large dogs. We don't want to challenge our large dogs by making them run in collection for the entire course. That's not the kind of challenge that we want. So we want that space, but we still want to challenge them. And then the way we do that is with the off-course traps and the design of the course. And so I guess that's the big difference between these two different experiments that you ran.
Right. I think that it was a little bit more difficult with the two different courses to find enough space for the big dogs and still keep the off courses as relevant as they might be on some of the more difficult courses they'd see. I think that worked almost better for the smaller dogs. I think that experiment, in my mind, the way it worked out, at least on that course, met those needs best for the smaller dogs. I think the second experiment was a little bit more in the realm of what I would expect what the large dogs might be encountering. And I think it was more difficult for the smaller dogs, and particularly the handlers who might have been a little less mobile, dealing with smaller dogs who weren't used to having to go 8 yards to find their next obstacle. I don't know that either one of these courses were the perfect answer. And, the only way we get better is to keep playing with ideas. But I enjoy getting to see people try these and play on them. And I appreciate that, that's how we learn stuff. That's how we as judges learn stuff. That's how we as competitors learn. I'm glad I got to do the experiment, and I'm glad I got to share it with you guys too.
All right. So let's talk about conclusions, experimental conclusions. So, we've heard a lot about what you thought. Do you have feedback from competitors, or, where do you think you go from here, or what advice would you give to the judges that are listening?
I definitely will try the two courses, the large and small dog course again. It will take the right setting again, because as you've mentioned, just the logistics of it, you want to make sure you have a club and a representative from AKC who may want to be there just to also take data back from it. It's a little more involved of a process. I think the small dog people in feeling the course, felt the off courses more presently in their dog's flow. Whether they liked that or not may depend upon their penchant for being challenged with off-course opportunity. Some loved it. Some were like, damn, that jump's pretty close. And that's fair. On the flip side, for the large dogs on those courses, I think the off-courses were friendlier to them. They were what they were used to begin with, which was the off-courses were out there kind of near that outer boundary on that cone, if you will. The opening of the space helped many of the dogs, but I don't think it got all the way to, some of the most athletically gifted dogs that are light and can open up and extend to, internationally world caliber levels, still find places on that course, along the back stretch of that, the course that is the big dog, small dog course, coming out of the tunnel 4, over 5, 6, the double to 7. That arc, even though you opened it up some, maybe I needed to open up more. I mean, the dogs were still finding those jumps, even at 23 some odd feet, probably, not necessarily with two fully extended strides into their takeoffs. So that required them to judge a related distance and have to manage their approach more than what they might see, at a more forgiving spacing. In the course where we just went with the same course for the big dogs and the small dogs, I think the flow for all the dogs, if handlers could be relevant and remain relevant, I think the flow for the dogs really worked well. I think the curves and lines, whether it was a big dog or a small dog, you saw a lot of dogs able to drive. I think it was uncomfortable for teams where the dogs had been trained. It's more popular these days in training to have the dogs with a little bit more connection to the handler. That's changing again, but we've got a lot of dogs out there who have a lot of connection to their handlers to get through difficult courses. And yet, because the spacing is so much bigger, there's not as much connection from the obstacles. The one obstacle doesn't connect the dog to the next as easily. And I think for some of the handlers who weren't mobile enough to really stay up there and run with their dogs, there was a little bit more barking, spinning, asking, and so that was a little uncomfortable. Plus, just the whole overall length that a handler then might have to run with that dog, it's starting to push them a little bit. It still fits within AKC's maximum yardage, so it's not that much longer, but it probably feels longer because they're having to do more of the work keeping their dog redirected outward, onward, rather than letting the obstacles kind of find the next obstacle for them.
Yeah, when you talk a little bit about the distances on both of those, one of the first things that I caught my eye on, being that I'm here in Ohio with a lot of indoor showing, is this one course. I believe it's like 115 by 85, I think. And I don't know in your area, I think you guys are on a lot of dirt and you have pretty open rings, and Sarah, you down in Texas, but Ohio, everything's indoors, everything up here. And I know a lot of the Midwest, and you go Northeast. And I think one of the struggles that the judges are being presented with is, even if they want to give some of these good, better distances and open up the building size, whether it be the size of the ring, or we're seeing a lot of buildings with posts that limit it. That's a whole nother logistical challenge that kind of a whole nother road you have to go down to in terms of, does AKC start to require larger rings? Do they limit the number of posts? And I think that's a tough one because clubs are working hard to get good facilities and get big facilities. And, you're kind of stuck in Ohio in winter having to go inside. So I know you mentioned on the one that you maybe would have liked to open it up a little bit more, but you were also stuck dealing with the current ring size. And that's a whole nother challenge.
Right. And that's where some of the flexibility and bouncing some of these ideas back and forth between, clubs, organizations, the exhibitors, maybe we need to look at it. I'm in an indoor space. I mean, you've competed overseas a lot. Indoor spaces overseas still have long dimensions, but we may or may not have them here. I mean, the difference in course size, like square footage, an American ring to an international ring, the square footage isn't that much different. If you actually multiply, width times length. But, often the we're getting, what are you getting? 125, 135 plus feet of one of the dimensions is really long.
Right.
When you're
our rings are more square. Theirs tend to be a little bit more rectangular.
Right.
So we get those longer edges. Yeah.
The overall square footage might be less than 10% difference, but the dimension difference is almost 50% longer. And so there's a significant difference there in what you can do with that in the rings we have here.
I 100% agree. Yep.
Right? It'd be nice to have, as an alternative, one of the things that helps that as a judge, if I can have that third or fourth tunnel pass so that, I can be a little bit more flexible. If I have poles, I can stick a jump on a pole, the wing on the pole, and know that I can always come back to it. But I've got a tunnel over here. I can get them in and out of that corner, or I can get them, from one little space where I really don't have room to land a jump, but I can take their path with a tunnel and make it comfortable. We don't have that opportunity right now in AKC, but I know they're listening to it. They hear the feedback, and so maybe we'll get that back. I think we've got it back in Premier, right? We get a third tunnel performance in Premier, so it may come back. It's give and take, and these things evolve. But it's been a fun process to be part of.
Yeah, well, we thank you for being that creative force for AKC and for judging design.
Please, let me just interrupt you. I'm just one. There are a lot of smart people who do a lot of interesting stuff, and this is just one idea, and there are a lot of cool ideas bouncing around. But thank you. It's just fun to play with, right? I mean, we all do this because we enjoy it, and if you don't enjoy it, don't do it. This is fun to play with and try to listen to the ideas and use your brain and think through what may or may not work. So
absolutely. All right. Well, we talked about our experiment. We talked about the hypothesis, the procedure, the conclusion. So I think that brings us to the end of the podcast. And thank you so much for joining us and giving us insight into the whole thought process and the things that you're doing on the course design front.
Well, I want to thank you all, and I'm going to add one more step to your process there, from the hypothesis to the what was it? The hypothesis to the testing to the conclusion.
Yeah.
Feedback. Anytime anybody has any feedback, thoughts, ideas, I want to hear it. We all get better by listening to what people think, and my idea may not be the best thing in your mind. You might look at it and say, I don't get that. I want to hear. I've been at this long enough. I don't mind. I like hearing back. So please, always feel free.
Perfect. Well, I'm sure people can find you on Facebook, and we'll put a link in the show notes to these two courses so that people can follow along. And that's it for this week's podcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Elite Science, hititboard.com, and NTI Global. It's NTI Agility's biggest sale of the year. All items, all colors, all variations are made to order and on sale. These are the savings you've been waiting for. Visit shop.ntiglobal.com for the widest selection of dog agility tunnels for both competition and backyard training. Known for free shipping, more options, high-quality products, and low prices, NTI Global has got you covered. They also offer tamer and anchor weight bags along with a full line of accessories and agility storage solutions. Need your agility gear in a hurry? Don't forget to check the in-stock selection. Visit shop.ntiglobal.com today. Happy training!
Man, I wonder what my parents did to fight boredom before the internet. I went and asked my 18 brothers and sisters, and they didn't know either.